All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Relatively Relevant AI Podcast. We have with us once again Mariah Hay. Say hi to everybody, Mariah.
Hello.
So this time around, we wanted to jump on a topic that's near and dear to Lori and I's heart, which is how businesses are crushing critical thinking and what you may be able to do to help your organization overcome that. And so I'm curious, it was one of the topics that you were passionate about, Mariah. What brought it to the forefront?
You know, there's a lot of people in tech right now that are very scared because there's been a lot of layoffs and, people are accepting more and more responsibilities in their roles as they've had colleagues attrit. And at the same time, businesses are whiplashing with lack of clarity. And, all of these things really, really hinder creative thinking because of the chaos and of the emotion around it. And so that's kind of something I've seen, and it out in the market, and it makes me kind of sad because we've got AI now, but we're the ones that need to do a lot of the critical thinking. And so
I agree with you. I was going to say, I couldn't agree with you more on it, especially because of AI now. We need more critical thinking. It's almost like we've taken work and we have, I'm a Michigan girl, so I love Henry Ford and, the factory line. Like, it's like we've taken that and then we've exploited it to the, in hundredth degree, to the point where there's nothing more you can maybe a little bit, but there's very little left that you can't look at anybody's role and say, this is the small box we're in, which is leaving us as human beings as it leaves us feeling like we don't have freedom. It leaves us feeling discouraged. It leaves us feeling as if we're trapped because, whatever our humanness is, our soul, our essence, our whatever that thing is that makes us human, right? That wants to grow. It's literally, we're adaptive machines. And then you come to work and companies are, truncating so much work into such little parts that a lot of companies and a lot of people are missing how do all those parts work together anymore, right? We've just gone down to this micro analysis and we're missing the bigger picture, which is what humans are amazing. It's what our complex thinking as humans is probably our greatest skill.
Yeah.
Well, it's a gift, but it's like anything else, like a muscle. If you don't use it, it atrophies real quick, right? And we've seen it. I mean, this was one of the frustrations I had that actually made me want to lean into Deep Human X, is because over the last decade and all the teams I've worked with and all the people I've trained, if somebody asked me what's the one constant, I would say without hesitation, it is the increasing rate of decline of critical thinking at all levels in the organization. Second only to that would be the ability of an organization to actually drive accountability. But the crushing of the critical thinking, I don't know why they're letting it happen. We all know it's a recipe for disaster. I don't know if it's speed or that weight thing, or if it's the hierarchical structure. You can swap people in or out. I mean, but you're seeing it everywhere.
It might be more about the leaders making space for flow. And you talk about flow a lot, Chad, as being a very important thing for critical thinking. You need that space and that time and the lack of distraction to really go deep on something. And more, we are being asked to segment our time. We've got, Slack and Teams and video calls, and then, people that still have email coming in from the side. And if you're an engineer in tech, you've got, unplanned work that happens, things breaking, account managers asking for things. And so, how I think the real question is, if we want more critical thinking, how do we create that environment in order to empower people to get into flow and tackle big things, rather than just being in the assembly line person, just putting the widget in, where, of course, people think that we can do that with tech, but we can't really. And when you lose somebody that is one of your good critical thinkers on the team, you really see it.
You feel it.
Down.
And there's two pieces to the equation. There's two pieces to the equation. Well, two pieces of the equation that I can see at this point. And look, I got a small, tiny little brain, but there's the individual contribution and like the empowerment piece, the space piece. Can I either create the space for myself to do it, or do I have a leader who's helping me create the space? But then there's the organizational obsession with busy. Like if I hear one more person say I'm too busy, like, okay, but I would be willing to bet you're not being as productive as you could be. So how do you, either side, on the organizational side or on the individual side, where do you start? Like, I have no idea. Where would you start?
Busy. So I'm reading this really interesting book right now called Slow Productivity. And the author of Slow Productivity asserts that busyness is actually an American cultural norm that stems from time tracking back to the Ford Motor Company days. So we used to be able to quantify everything down to how long it takes to like ship a car, right? But we can't do that with a lot of the productive things that we create with our knowledge work. Like, how long does it create an application? I don't know. We guess at things. Like it's not an exact science. And so when you're working in not an exact science, then how do you quantify to your leadership that you're actually delivering value? And the value is in the performative busyness. And so when you're in the office, you act really busy. You're in lots of meetings. You're running around. Online, you are checking it, like you're putting things on Slack, or you're doing this, or that. You have meetings as well. But it's actually a proxy for us mentally, psychologically, to prove that we're doing something. And our bosses buy into this too, which is why people want to return to office. Because like, how do we know people are working hard? Well, are you seeing results in your business? That's how you know. I mean, like,
I know. And if you don't think I'm working hard, you should have that management discussion, right? That coaching discussion. So I'm going to ask the hard question. How much does ego play into this? Because we're at a place now where let's go, we got the Henry Ford, right, analogy. And back then it was like, it was very much creative thinking to be like, we're kind of just waiting for this group to pass to this group. It was very creative thinking to say, hey, let's bring them all together and look at start to finish, right? But that was like one line. But we're at a place where, the web, literally, everything might have 25 connections. So there's no longer a start and stop. Like you just can't get that linear, but we're still managing, we're still holding people accountable to the quarterly and yearly, OKRs and stuff that are really still around activity and not around, how much closer are you to actually achieving a big problem? Yeah. And I have a little bit of inkling that this comes from leaders not necessarily knowing exactly what they want, but assigning things and saying, okay, yeah, you have the freedom to go figure it out, but I need you to then report in this way and work this way. So to me, there's this essence of ego at play, right? There's ego from me, let's say as one direct leader, but then there's from counterparts on your leadership team or the board or whatever it is. Like it feels like there's a lot of ego play around this of, we like to feel like we're important, right? Individually, like I'm busy. So like, how much does ego play into that?
Well, there's kind of two things that I'd like to call out around ego and clarity and OKRs and people getting stuff done. The first is we need leaders to focus on the outcomes they're trying to create for the business instead of the outputs, which are the busy work, right? If you can really define the outcomes you want to create, you can then give the team the autonomy to go try things and experiment. And it's not going to be a linear path for them to get there, but at least they know what they're measuring against rather than just checking boxes and shipping little pieces, right? Now, on the flip side, you've got ego. And I think one of the reasons why leaders are hesitant to give teams outcomes is because they think they have all the answers to everything. And so they already have the vision. They already know what the product should be. They already understand the solution, and nobody understands it as well as them. So instead of giving the outcome, they try to define the output, but they haven't actually done the work and they're not actually close enough to the customer. And so the ego is this constant churn that gets in the way, and the team won't create the outcomes that the leader wants, because the leader's just telling them the outputs, and the outputs aren't like, it's the leader's fault when the outcomes don't happen, because if they're shipping all the things, but then they blame the team. So then you fire everybody. It's the catch-22. It
feels like that. It does feel like that's the cycle, the vicious cycle that we're in is you're like, well, I go do something and then it was against someone's ego comes into play and is like, well, that's not what I was thinking. And you're like, yeah, but you didn't think about this, and this. But often there's no room for you to say, like, the questions aren't being asked. I think good leaders ask the questions. Well, now tell me why you did that so I can understand your thinking. And many leaders, again, going back to the ego thing, are like, I'm supposed to know this, instead of, wait, what could I learn from you? Because you actually are doing the work.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You have a lot of tastemakers at the top that think that they know better. But if they're no longer in the weeds with the customers doing the work, then they aren't the ones that should be making the decision. That's why you delegate and you hire teams of smarter people than you to, create those outcomes. But it's easier sometimes to just be like, I am the visionary and like, here, do these things. But it usually results in tears for everybody.
Well, and the person who thinks that they have all the answers, the first person who says, you don't know it as well as I do, blah, 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 that's the first person I'm not listening to. Because, like, I'm sorry, I'm Gen X to the core. I drank out of the garden hose. I didn't die. And I'm here to F around and find out. But I'm not going to listen to somebody who's going to tell me you have all the answers. Now, I will say that came with experience and age, because when I was young and dumb and not old and dumb, I might have probably pulled the same crap. But as you get older, you realize nobody has all of the answers, but there is something organizationally, there's this fear that I see in these leaders of like, if I don't have the answer, if I say, I don't know, let's work on that together, or I don't know, let me go get input from someone else, that somehow equates to them seeing themselves as less than, or afraid that others will see them as less than. So I think there's cultural issues that play there that we bring into the workplace, much like the author was talking about the busy being part of our culture. And the other is, if I can at least show that I'm doing my outputs, you can't get rid of me. Rather than taking pride in the outcome and working in an environment where you have leaders who are creating that space and have been trained and educated so that they can do that. Because, no offense, but a lot of the leaders I've seen in these organizations, they got promoted because they had a good quarter or they delivered a good project, not because they have the skills necessary to be a good coach and leader.
Yeah.
100% with that. But speaking of good coaches and leaders, right? I've watched both of you, right, be really wonderful with people. And I feel like we are harping on the what is. And I think we all are in agreement that it is industrialized. That is the way the corporate world is today. So as using our critical thinking here, like, what do you think are some ways that we can actually change? Like, you're not going to change the whole system overnight, but like I always feel like humans will change it when we start changing the things we value. But what do you guys think are some ways that we could change leadership or change thinking to start giving opportunities to start dismantling some of these crazy cycles that people are in?
I mean, this is what I've done in previous roles. So I was chief experience officer at Help Scout, which is the last company I was an executive at before I founded Allboarder. And one of my goals was to empower the teams to be able to do this autonomously, because they had grown from a small company where, when companies are very small, typically you have CEOs like me, like Allboarder's 4 people right now. But when you grow to 100 people, your CEO isn't your product researcher, product person anymore. You have to delegate that. And so I had come into the organization to try to make the shift to take the CEO and allow him to really focus on more higher level executive role things, and then empower the teams to actually do the discovery to further different parts of the application. And so it's a couple of things like bringing in people with the right skills. So qualitative and quantitative research skills onto your cross-functional tech team to make sure your tech teams are acting actually cross-functionally with, product management and research and UX and engineering and data. And then 3 is creating the clear definitions for what those boundaries are for the team. So this is like, okay, you own this, and here's the outcome you need to create with this. And if you can align those 3 things, your practices, your skills, and how you talk about how you're going to, what good looks like and what you're trying to accomplish, then you can start to empower teams. But you have a lot of cultural fear too that you have to try to overcome. And so even working through that and understanding what people have worried about in the past, if you can remove that fear, then you can allow the space to do this deep work. But without
I think you're easier. Yeah, I think you're better off like in that situation where it's a small company going to the next leap, whatever it is. I think there's an adaptability that an opportunity for adaptability that exists. That's great. That if seized by the right individuals, you can do that. You could accomplish that type of thing. When you look at some of those bigger companies trying to become even bigger companies, I think there's a bigger challenge in where and how you go about creating the space for it. So in my head, because I'm a visual guy, it's kind of like you got to create an air pocket in the aquarium, and you got to let the team, you got to run a pilot, you got to give them space, and you just start with, okay, this team, you're responsible for this outcome in 6 months. Go. And leave them alone. Like give them the space. Start with a pilot. But you all back to your point of you got to have the right people with the right skills or the right mix of skills that complement each other to get to that kind of group that can work autonomously off of each other, magnify each other, and achieve those outcomes in ways that somebody probably didn't even expect was possible. So creating that pilot, I think, is one way I would probably start in a larger organization. I think right now with all the tech and stuff, I think the smaller orgs that want to get bigger are already ahead of the big ones that want to get even bigger because they have much more flexibility and hopefully adaptability.
I think there's something to that with the adaptability, right? Like with big organizations, you can't just, right? You're still an army marching, right? Trying to keep things afloat. So that has to happen. But there does have to be some energy or space. And when we go back to critical thinking, it's like we've almost handicapped ourselves as companies because we're like, it's us and it's them. And those are our competitors. So we can't, it's like we keep shutting down barriers instead of reaching out and saying, hey, I know I'm in financial services and you're in logistics and shipping, but actually we're doing the same problem. Can't I, maybe I should call the head of product over here if I'm the head of product in financial services. And I think that, I don't know, I'd love to see that mindset shift a little bit of our barriers of even within big organizations to realize that right, there is going to be so much abundance and opportunity with the tech changes because this is way bigger than the .coms, right? The change that we're upon. But how can we, I don't know, just lessen the amount of, I feel like bars and barriers that we keep putting. It's like we've gone like this and you're like, okay, this is as a company, all I can do. When in reality, you're this big behemoth that could change the world. Yeah. If you had the right purpose, if you had the right mastery, if you had the right drive.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mariah, I think you have the perfect mix of experience from Pluralsight and being executives of other companies, larger companies. I mean, very rarely do small companies go public. You have that experience to now doing something purposefully from the ground up to experiment in real time. I mean, based on our conversation, it sounds like you're experimenting in real time and nobody seems to be freaking out about that, which is great, right? I think that's gonna propel you to outcomes beyond anybody's expectation. I would wonder, like, if somebody came to you that was in one of those organizations and based on that sets of experience, if you had to give them 2 or 3 things to say, hey, start here, where would that be?
Goal
clarity.
I put you
on the spot again. Sorry.
Goal clarity would be my first number one thing. If you don't know what the target looks like, you're not going to hit it. So, and you might not have all the skills, but people can be really resourceful if there is a clear goal. So goal clarity and responsibility structure. You've got to put people in charge. Like, this was my biggest gripe with group projects when I was a grad student. I'm like, group projects are BS. And my teachers would go, oh yeah, but you're learning to work with each other. I'm like, we're not, because nobody's in charge to make the hard call when you're having a disagreement. You always need tie breaking. And so you've got to have goal clarity and tie breaking. And if you can create that and put a group of people together, like, usually they can figure it out unless something is wildly culturally broken. But that's what I would do in order to pick two things to do. How about
So
you?
what keeps people from doing it today? What keeps people from what is it that we feel like is getting in the way? This for anybody. Like what is it that keeps them? Because it seems pretty simple, right? I mean, those are even small words. Like I think everybody can understand them. But what keeps organizations or individuals from doing it?
Because goals come from the very top. And it's funded from the very top. And it might not even just be the CEO, it could be the board too. And even small companies have boards, they take funding. And so the goal clarity, like leadership has to do that, because otherwise the target will keep changing. And I always liken it to going on a road trip, right? If I'm living here in Georgia and I'm like, okay, I'm driving to San Francisco, and then I'm halfway there and they're like, no, actually you're going to Dallas. No, actually you're going to Portland. No, actually, like you're never going to get anywhere. The road trip is going to drag on and on. You're never going to like arrive. And so I think that goal clarity is so important. So that's the highest level. And then the next highest is your mild hierarchy. And it doesn't even have to be official. It can be like your team lead, you break the ties, you make sure the team is headed in the direction of the goal. Go. They don't even have to report to you. You just have to be given the blessing. And so, yeah, I think
I so am in agreement with you about like set the destination and don't worry about the course. Tell me you have to get there the fastest, right? If you set my destination to San Francisco, I need you to be there in the fastest, most efficient way. There you go. I'll figure that out. Is it train? Is it helicopter? Is it air? What is it? Right? Like I'll figure out, but if you keep changing it, or what it feels like even happens more is somebody then stops in, you're in Georgia and you're moving through, let's say you're maybe hitting up Kansas now or something. And all of a sudden somebody's like, hold on, I want to stop and actually look at your whole car. I want to ask you, why did you not change your tires back here? And you're like, what? So I 100% agree with you on that. Create destination, create goals. And I mean, what has happened in leadership where we've stopped making it like remembering like life is beautiful. Life's a game, right? Like we can do amazing things. It doesn't have to be these transactional things that's all about money. But many leaders, the minute they move up, they stop being any type of practitioner. They're like, I don't do that anymore. I do this. And I make a tie-breaking call, which probably serves short term, but in the long term, it feels like it ends up being a whole bunch of people making calls that are missing the fact that you're riding in a car to San Francisco. So how do we get leaders excited about saying, we're going to San Francisco, and then, doing town halls and company visits and you know what I mean? Like going to all your different locations to say, hey, everybody, no matter where you are in the US, you're going to San Francisco. Yeah. Like, what can we do to spark that creative or that critical thinking in leaders too?
It's a new skill set for them too, as they move up, and you usually have to hire a really good communications person to help you proliferate that within the company. Like when I was at Pluralsight and we were growing, I think our executive team, they did a good job of continuing to hire executives for the right stage that had the knowledge and experience that we needed to shepherd the company. It was very evident that they did a great job of that. And the CEO at the time, Aaron Sconard, who was the co-founder, he did an awesome job of always talking about where we were going with the company. And it really helped, us parse that out. It's funny though, when you mentioned leaders that stop practicing. One of my favorite friends, colleagues, former leader, this guy, Nate Walkingshaw, I worked for, who's another chief experience officer. He started this great energy company now called Taurus. I'd check them out. They do home battery systems, and another Utah startup. But he used to always say, you need to be a Martha Stewart leader. You can run the company, but you can bake the cookies. Like you need to understand the whole food chain. So as you're making decisions, you're informed enough to be able to make it. And she might not be an expert at all the cookies that ever exist, but she'll go find the best, gosh darn, German cookie maker that makes, Black Forest cookies, and she will learn alongside that person. But as long as you have those fundamentals, it's important. But sometimes I think we have people that end up in leadership roles that
don't have the fundamentals.
You don't have the fundamentals, and then they have the
don't
ego
have
and
the
the fear of they're supposed to know, and so then we're back to crushing critical thinking. We're like, oh, if you are running and worried about what you're going to do, you are going to be. Critical thinking is going to be very hard, right? Innovation is going to be hard. It's literally different pathways in your brain. If you're running primarily fear-based, you are actually shutting off your creativity and innovation. And like Chad mentioned earlier, you know, all of that, those skills are just like doing reps at the gym, your human pathways, your brain neural pathways, right? The more you use them, the better they get, the more, you know, cells they're trying to connect with. But I would just love to see that, right? To where it's, especially because with AI, where we have, you know, people just thinking of beautiful things, and we're all taking humanity to the next level. Like, we are at some crazy circumstances right now, but we have the opportunity to take humanity further than it's ever been. Yes. If we are innovative, if we use our critical thinking and creative.
Well, you have to do it now too, right? Like, there's no like, hey, I'm gonna do it next quarter, or I'll do it the quarter after, right? Because this stuff's moving so fast. Like Tyler Perry was planning on building this massive movie studio. I can't remember where, somewhere out west, maybe Vegas. I can't remember, but it was like, we're talking like $1 billion plus project, and it was Vegas, going to turn Vegas into the next Hollywood, right? Then Sora comes out. They release the footage from what the Sora model can do in terms of video production and creation, and he stopped the project. Right now, was it wise to stop it or not? I don't know. But somebody somewhere was doing the critical thinking of, okay, well, that's cute now, but what does it mean in 12, 14, 18, 24 months? And now how do I pivot? And so, great. In that place, it's his money. He can make that change, whatever. I think some of these organizations have to start getting on the bandwagon to figure out how to equip these leaders to have the space, have the critical skills, have the accountability and the trust. You have to trust them that if you give them a desired outcome, you've hired the right people that will find a way to get you there. And I don't know how many are ready to do it, but I can tell you, if they don't start doing it soon, they're in for a world of hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do wonder if there isn't a lot of favoritism and bias at play in people that land in some of these executive roles that really undercuts the companies. And, you know, I guess I'll say it. Sometimes there's a good old boys club, and you have circulating executives that go from one company to another. And I guess we could ask, like, is that actually serving these companies?
Oh, I see in the enablement space all the time. Yeah. I see, like, there's a crew who I will not name, who have gone from 3 big brands that anybody listening to this would know, and basically gutted the enablement function in these large organizations. And what do you see a quarter later? Drop in stock price. Like, but hey, they worked over here, so let's put them over here. Or I went over here, I'm going to bring everybody else. There's a lot of that goes on. Too much of it, honestly, that goes on.
I know, and that's fear-based. Again, like, it seems safer to hire. What was the old quote from the 80s, right? You won't get fired from hiring IBM. And that goes back to like the fear-based that we're thinking. But I agree with you that I definitely think there are some people who are like, no, you don't get it. Like, you're at this role in leadership now. Like, you don't want to give up this power. And you're like, no, but when I entered the workforce a couple of decades ago, I knew it was BS. We've seen it from millennials and Gen Z very clearly. Like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that, because and I knew way back then I called it as BS. But now we're having, and I think there will always be those groups that are moving up to the very, very top tier that are like, yeah, I have to maintain because I'm at a Fortune 500 company or whatever. But anybody who's not in the top 15 of those companies, the rest of us need to start changing, like, the way leadership is looked at, right? It can't be the hierarchical structure, because there's just not enough room for growth. There's not enough room for creativity and innovation and making a difference. I mean, we are human beings. We are connected to other people. We are wired to connect. And when we think about something bigger than ourselves, which can be hard to do in our very individualized societies, like, we can have great impact, and we can cause amazing teams to do amazing results by setting a destination and having some of that freedom.
So, all right, and wrap it up here. I want to just one big takeaway you want to make sure the audience gets from each of us, and either one of you can start first. What's the big thing? Like, hey, you listen to it, you understand the problem, that there's a problem and a need for more critical thinking inside of the organization. What would you give them as the one big takeaway?
The capacity is there and you can unlock it. Full stop.
Love it.
I like it. Hashtag.
Capacity there. I would add to that. I think it's mostly about awareness. Like, start getting curious with yourself. When we talked about kind of being fearful, what are the actual boundaries and barriers that you're putting within your own view of leadership? Like, when you're like, oh, I want to do this, but I can't because my boss won't let me. Like, not to do anything, but just start taking inventory of how many of those are there. And then when you start taking inventory and you start comparing, you might see some that you're like, that's not actually true, but I've been holding it as true. So that would be my advice to people is actually go in and see, where are some of the ways that you're putting in your own blockers.
I love it. I would tell everybody, you're your first speed bump. You're the first speed bump you got to overcome. It's not going to start. Nobody else is going to do it for you. You got to figure out how to get it done. So I want to say thank you to everybody for listening. Mariah, thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. Absolute pleasure as always. Look forward to talking to you again soon.